In 1966, the Central Intelligence Agency of the United States released a cat. That's not a metaphor, there's no subtext. They released a cat into a park near the Soviet embassy because the cat, and I need you to stay with me here, had a microphone surgically implanted into its ear, a radio transmitter embedded in the base of its skull, and an antenna woven through its tail. The cat was, in the formal language of the project documentation, a field asset. The cat was struck by a taxi almost immediately. I'm reading this as I honestly can't believe it's real. The official budget for this program was $20 million. The official postmortem conclusion, classified for several decades by the way, reads, and I quote, "Cats are not particularly trainable. $20 million. Regrettably." In my secondary career as a licensed grief counselor for failed hedge funds, I have reviewed a considerable quantity of suboptimal institutional decision-making. I've seen organizations deploy capital in ways that, in retrospect, were what I would describe clinically as a bit of a problem. But nothing, and I want to be very clear about this, nothing in the private sector comes close to the specific flavor of failure that emerges whenever you hand a government agency an unlimited budget, an existential geopolitical threat, and the unshakable belief that no idea is too big, too weird, or too structurally doomed to attempt. Today, 3 case studies, one involving jet engines on human ankles, one involves a spray bottle and a catastrophic misunderstanding of wind, and one, as you already know, involves a $20 million cat. None of them worked, all of them passed peer review, and all of them taken together constitute what I would formally describe as an education. We begin with the boots. The year is 1958. The Army has a problem, a logistical one. Infantry soldiers move slowly. God, they're so slow. Terrain is uncooperative, mud exists, the Cold War is accelerating, and somewhere in the Department of Defense, a man who I will not name but who I will describe as strategically overconfident looked at these facts and arrived at the following conclusion.
What if we could put jet engines on the soldiers' legs?
Right then. The ZK-1, also known internally as the jump belt, strapped 2 small kerosene-fueled jet engines directly to a soldier's lower leg with the theoretical promise that the wearer would leap over obstacles, cover terrain at impossible speed, and generally transform every infantryman into what the project documentation described as a human grasshopper. What are we doing here? Now, I want to be fair. The ZK-1 design team were not amateurs. These were engineers, credentialed professionals with presumably functioning relationships at least a few years of post-secondary education between them. And yet, at no point in the documented development timeline does anyone appear to have asked the following question.
Has anyone tried walking in these?
Because if they had, they would have discovered, as the field testers subsequently discovered at some personal cost, that jet engines are, and I cannot stress this enough, very, very heavy. The ZK-1, when fully fueled and operational, weighed significantly more than what a soldier's lower legs are designed anatomically to carry during normal bipedal locomotion. The baseline activity the device was supposed to improve upon, walking, became with the device attached considerably harder than it had been without it. Now, administratively speaking, this was a bit of a problem. Now, here I must pause because the ZK-1 is not merely a story about bad boots. It's a textbook demonstration of what cognitive scientists call the planning fallacy, a bias that I've talked about in the past. This is a bias formally identified by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky in 1979. Though governments had been enthusiastically practicing it since before the Roman Empire, the planning fallacy is most virulently and exactly the conditions the ZK-1 team were operating in. A high-stakes environment with institutional pressure to produce results and a social dynamic in which asking something like, wait, is this gonna work? Is a major career-limiting situation. Nobody on the team wanted to be the person who said things everyone was already thinking. They were not stupid. They were, to use a technical term, optimistically miscalibrated. And the field testers paid for it. There were 3 additional failure modes. I will cover them with appropriate brevity because, moving on, there is more to go through. 1. Torque. 2 engines on a human body must be synchronized. If they're not, the differential thrust begins rotating the wearer, not dramatically, not entertainingly, just incrementally, and then not incrementally until the tester is on the ground facing a direction no one had initially planned on. Number 2, landing. At some point, allegedly, someone asked what happens after the leap. The answer was the soldier lands, with jet engines on his feet. The impact forces were sufficient to cause what project documents described with extraordinary restraint as significant lower extremity stress events. That means broken ankles. That's what that means. Broken ankles was the intended outcome of the device designed to improve infantry mobility. Suboptimal doesn't begin to cover it. Number 3, and this is an important one, it's called noise. The ZK-1 produced, when operational, the sound of 2 jet turbines at close range. The Army wanted a tactical advantage. Instead, they built a device that telegraphed the soldier's position to every enemy within a 300-meter range before the soldier had even left the ground. So imagine trying to sneak up on anyone, with 2 screaming blowtorches attached to your heels. The program was discontinued, quietly. No press conference, no formal announcement. The files were archived. The boots were presumably placed somewhere no one would have to look at them. Strategically ill-advised. That's the most generous reading available. We turn now to 1943 and to a weapon so conceptually peculiar that it took me several passes through the archive record to confirm I wasn't reading satire. The Office of Strategic Services, or OSS, this was the precursor to the CIA, was running psychological operations against German forces in occupied Europe. The theory, which is sound, was this: military authority depends on projection of dignity. An officer who loses public dignity loses command credibility. If you undermine the dignity, you undermine the machine. Their solution was a small spray bottle containing a chemical compound formulated to replicate with scientific precision the exact smell of a significant human biological incident. The working name for this compound, and this is the actual name, was who? Me? The writers on this one have really outdone themselves. The theory was this: operative approaches officer in a public setting, a restaurant, a market, an administrative plaza. Operative deploys compound covertly. Operative departs. Officer is now, from the perspective of everyone around him, a man who has had a significant personal incident in public. So essentially, authority gone, credibility gone. German officer standing in a market smelling absolutely terrible and unable to explain why. Multiply this across enough officers in enough locations and you have, in theory, a systematic degradation of the German command structure, one spray bottle at a time. The theory, I want to stress, is not without internal logic. It is the execution where things became, moving on, somewhat less controlled than anticipated. The compound failed for 2 reasons, both of which were, in retrospect, completely foreseeable by anyone who's ever been outside. The first was chemistry. The compound was extraordinarily volatile, meaning it dispersed rapidly into the surrounding air, which sounds operationally useful, except the operative was also in the surrounding air. Standing within arm's length of the target, the compound did not care about the operational parameters. the compound dispersed in all directions, including toward the person holding the spray bottle, barely contained. Oh, so once again, what are we doing here, guys? The operative, trained, credentialed, presumably someone who has passed a psychological evaluation at some point in their career, was now standing next to a German officer, both of them smelling identically terrible in a public place while being a clandestine intelligence agent or asset. This is what I would describe formally as a strategic alignment failure across multiple dimensions simultaneously. But wait, it gets worse, regrettably. The second reason was wind. I want to be very precise here because I think precision is important when discussing a failure of this particular variety. Wind is a phenomenon that has been observed and documented pretty much continuously since the beginning of time. It is taught to children. It is incorporated into every outdoor operational activity. The OSS, an organization staffed by some of the most highly trained intelligence operatives in the world, people who had parachuted into occupied France, people who operated under a daily risk of summary execution, did not, in any documented phase of the Who Me program, appear to have made formal provisions for wind. When the wind blows towards you and you are holding a spray bottle containing a highly volatile chemical compound, the compound travels towards you. That's pretty basic foundational Newtonian physics. And yet, within 2 weeks of field distribution, the OSS operatives were refusing to carry the device. Internal correspondence noted the weapon posed an unacceptable risk to the operative's social standing. Also his operational effectiveness, and I love that this made it into the official record, general quality of life. The project was terminated, the formula was archived, the concept was not revisited. I'd like you to leave a comment below and tell me whether you think the person who greenlit the Who Me project deserves a military commendation for creativity, or should they have been fired pretty much immediately and they should have never gone to market? Just let me know. So look, if this institutional postmortem has been of any value to you, please subscribe. It's free, it takes about 3 seconds, and it makes the algorithm believe that I'm a legitimate operation. Like the video as well. Moving on. And now, the cat. The CIA by the early 1960s had developed a genuinely impressive surveillance technology. Listening devices miniaturized to extraordinary degrees. Transmitters concealed in furniture and walls, in diplomatic gifts. The Cold War intelligence apparatus was, from a purely technical standpoint, remarkable. What it could not solve was a specific operational problem. Soviet officials, aware of conventional surveillance methods, had begun conducting sensitive conversations in the most insane of all places, outdoors. Places like parks and in open spaces where devices couldn't be planted and where human operatives couldn't approach without being noticed. The CIA convened. They reviewed the available options, they applied the full weight of the American institutional intelligence to the problem, and someone, allegedly, said, "What about a cat?" And I need you to understand the full scope of what was authorized by a functioning government of nuclear power. CIA veterinary staff and technical engineers spent approximately 1 year surgically modifying a single domestic cat. A microphone was implanted in the ear canal, a radio transmitter was placed in the base of the skull, an antenna was threaded through the fur and the length of the cat's tail. The cat was then subjected to an extensive behavioral conditioning program, which is what we call it when you try to teach a cat to go where you point. Extensive conditional training program. Has anyone here ever tried to make a cat do anything? Tell me in the comments. Right then. This brings me to the second cognitive concept I need you to understand. The curse of knowledge is a bias in which a person who has developed deep expertise in a domain finds it progressively harder to think like someone who hasn't. The expert's model of the world becomes so detailed, so inherently consistent, so technically complete that they lose the ability to see the enormously obvious things that exist outside of it. The CIA technical team were genuinely brilliant. They had miniaturized a radio transmitter to the size of a small battery. They had surgically implanted it in a living animal. From an engineering standpoint, what they had achieved was remarkable. What they had not done at any point in the 5-year process was ask someone who owned a cat. Anyone who has owned a cat could have provided the following information at zero cost. You cannot tell a cat what to do. This is not a niche piece of knowledge. This is not something that requires access to classified databases. This is the oldest documented fact about cats in human civilization. The curse of knowledge had insulated the team so completely inside their own domain of expertise that the obvious external reality, the one that every single cat owner on Earth has confirmed personally, repeatedly, across an entire span of human history, simply did not register as relevant data for the geniuses. They were brilliant, specialized, and operating with an extraordinary blind spot. So the details. The first field test took place near the Soviet embassy in Washington, D.C. 2 Soviet officials were observed using a nearby park bench. The cat was released from the CIA vehicle. The bench was visible. The distance was not prohibitive by any operational standard. The cat did not walk towards the bench. The cat walked towards the street. A taxi, proceeding in the ordinary course of its professional duties, struck the cat. The Acoustic Kitty program was, at this juncture, concluded because the cat was dead. The internal CIA memorandum recommending termination, declassified decades later, presumably once the assessment had sufficiently long expiration window, noted that the concept had proven, quote, not practical. It further observed that cats present control problems in a real-world environment. It described the technical team's work as pioneering. The cat was not mentioned again. $20 million. I'm reading this and I still can't believe it was real. $20 million, 1 cat, 1 mission, and 1 squashed cat. So, it's time for you to tell me in the comments, which of these 3 would you have signed up to test? And I want you to actually think about it, because one option smells terrible, one option might break your ankles, and one option puts you in a car watching a cat get hit by a taxi. These are your options. Choose carefully. If this review has been of any value to you, there is another case study on the screen now. A different organization, a different era, and a structurally identical failure mode. It is worth your time, administratively speaking. It is one of the more efficient uses of the next 14 minutes currently available to you. Subscribe and stay, as always, clinically detached.